Welcome to Downpour.com's interview series. I'm Rick Bleiweiss, and today it's my pleasure to be speaking with Melissa de la Cruz. Melissa is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of many critically acclaimed and award-winning novels for teens, including the Au Pairs series, the Blue Bloods series, the Ashleys series, and the Angels on Sunset Boulevard series. A former fashion and beauty editor, she has written for publications such as the New York Times, Marie Claire, Harper's Bazaar, Glamour, Cosmopolitan, and 17. She has also appeared on CNN, E!, and Fox News as a fashion expert. Melissa has written several adult books as well, including Cat's Meow, Fresh Off the Boat, and the Witches of East End series. Her latest young adult novel is Gates of Paradise. Recorded Books published the audio version of Gates of Paradise, narrated by Christina Moore, simultaneously with the hardcover on January 15, 2013, and it is available on Downpour.com. Welcome, Melissa. Thanks for joining us today. Congratulations on the release of Gates of Paradise. Gates of Paradise is book 7 in the Blue Bloods series. Do you have an overall idea of the scope of the series, or did it naturally develop?
I always had an overall idea for the series, but it changed as I started writing them. It didn't occur to me that while I was writing the series, the readers would be reading them. It's kind of all in your mind at first, and then the reality of actually writing and publishing an ongoing series is interesting. I originally wanted to do 3 trilogies. I wanted to do first 3 books and kind of have this huge plot point reveal, and then do a prequel trilogy with the story of the background of the older characters, and then pick up the story again in books 7 to 9. But as I was writing it, I realized I actually didn't want to write a prequel. I thought prequels would be boring if you knew what had happened at the end. And so I decided instead to do a 7-book saga and just incorporate the prequel trilogy into the main story.
How did the main character, Skylar Van Allen, originate? What is it about Skylar that you think captures readers' imaginations?
I think a lot of readers relate to Skylar because she is an outcast and feels very alienated in high school. I actually think high school is very hard on everybody, and everyone has a little bit of Skylar in them, and no one ever feels like they fit in. Even my friends who said they were popular in high school never felt that they were popular. And I think high school is kind of that just a very insecure time for everybody. So whether you were popular in high school or alienated, there's something about Skylar that you relate to. The other thing that I hear from my readers a lot is that Skylar is very strong. And there's a huge part of what makes her very appealing is that she has very little family and background support, but she's a survivor. When Hurricane Katrina happened, I got a lot of emails from fans who lived through that and said they were inspired by Skylar to carry on as well. You know, you have to carry on, you have to survive. And I think Skylar is a survivor, and a lot of people relate to that.
That must have been very gratifying to you to have that kind of reaction.
Yeah, you write the stories and you have no idea how it touches people or what it means to their lives. So it is really very moving, and you feel like, wow, that's kind of great that people take inspiration and comfort from the books, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you have a background as a fashion magazine editor and a TV fashion expert. What drew you to writing in the supernatural genre?
It's funny. I always tell people it takes decades to go back to where you started. Underneath the fashion facade is a huge sci-fi and fantasy geek, and that's really who I am, kind of underneath. And I think I was always drawn to fashion for the same reason I was drawn to fantasy, is that with fashion, what I always liked was kind of these outrageous, crazy, out-of-this-world clothes that no one would ever wear in real life. For instance, a lot of Alexander McQueen's designs, I think, kind of come out from a fantasy epic novel. So I like fashion in the same way I like fantasy, that they're not part of reality. I was never really attracted to the more status and snob appeal of fashion. I thought that was actually a boring part of the fashion world. What I liked about fashion was the fantasy, was this kind of crazy life that nobody really leads. You pick up Vogue and there's a pony in the kitchen, and who lives like that? No one really lives like that, not even the people with the pony in the kitchen. So I really like this kind of outrageousness of both of them.
You've been described as a crossover sensation, and you created an instant New York Times bestseller with Witches of East End. Did that come as a surprise to you?
I always say that you hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst. And I never really expect anything. So it was a nice surprise. But I think there were actually a lot of expectations from my publisher. So while it was a surprise, it was also a relief that the book did well.
Oh, that's great. Now, I believe Witches of East End has been optioned as a TV series. Can you tell us something about that?
Sure. It actually got picked up. We are in production. It's really, really exciting. Lifetime will air 10 episodes this summer, starting in late June, I believe. And Julia Ormond and Jenna Dewan Tatum are our stars. Julia plays Joanna, and Jenna plays the sexy witch Freya, and Rachel Boston plays Ingrid. I was able to see some of the pilot taping, which was really cool. Mark Waters, who directed Mean Girls, directed our pilot, and I really loved the team who's putting the show together. It's so fun and sexy and really true to the book. I was actually in tears when I read the script. They took such good care of my book, and I really liked all the changes they made. You know, they're making a television show, and I think David Sedaris said it best: when you give permission, you say yes, and then you step back. You don't micromanage. I'm a writer. I don't make TV shows, so they know how to make TV shows, and you have to let them do what they need to do.
Oh, great. Now, Blue Bloods has been adapted as a graphic novel. Are there any plans for that for either a film or a TV series?
Not right now. Blue Bloods has been optioned several times over the years, and I actually turned down several offers. I believe there were 3 in the last year. I just wasn't in the mood to sell it. I was still in the middle of writing the series, and I think mentally it was frightening to me to think that I was in the middle of this big story and then somebody would start telling a different story in TV or in the movies that, you know, they would have to change. But right now, since the series has ended, I think I would be open to it. And I think I can step back now, whereas I wasn't able to do before. So it's available now.
Okay. Now, I believe Gates of Paradise that is the final novel in the Blue Blood series. Are you planning any spin-off series, or do you know what's next?
Yes, there is actually a spin-off. It's going to be an adult Blue Blood series published by the Teen and Children's Division of Hyperion, and Witches is published by the Adult Division. So now there's going to be a Blue Bloods adult series tentatively titled The Vampires of Manhattan. And I think that comes out, I think, next year. It's due this year.
That's a very cool name. I love it. I look forward to it. When you write for young adults, how do you stay in touch with the young adult audiences? Do you have something that you do to make sure you stay relevant to them?
I actually write for teens because I feel like I never grew up. And I think a lot of young adult writers say the same thing. At heart, you're still a kid. And I find growing up and taking responsibility is very difficult for me. Some people just kind of naturally mature and, you know, grow up. Whereas part of me is still 14 or 17, sticking my tongue out, holding grudges, playing inappropriate music to my 6-year-old child. I really sympathize with teenagers. I kind of feel like I know how they think and what they want to do. They want to do everything. They want to grow up so fast. They're very arrogant and they're beautiful and they're insecure. And I just love that time of life. And I think I treasure it in myself and keep that part of myself from growing up. And that way I relate to them. I feel like I'm a teenager. You need to have that viewpoint if you're going to write for teenagers successfully. I don't feel like I'm talking to children. I feel like I'm talking to my peers. And I think it's not about staying relevant or trying to ape their language or their clothing or the slang. I think I'm interested in pop culture and everything that's current, and that keeps me young. But I also think, like, deeply, you have to really sympathize and almost be a teenager to write for teens. And teens will get that. They'll know what authors really get them and relate to them and what authors might be cashing in on a trend. You can kind of tell.
I don't remember the exact quote, but at the recent Academy Awards, when Daniel Day-Lewis accepted the Oscar for Best Lead Actor in a Motion Picture for Lincoln, when he thanked Spielberg, he commented that one of his greatest traits was his eternal youthfulness. And that sounds exactly like you.
Oh, well, Spielberg is a hero. And I think that's why people really relate to his movies and to his art, is because he remembers and is able to tell people exactly what it's like to be a kid, to be vulnerable and to have wonder and to be excited about things. And I think, if you are going to create pop culture, you have to be like that.
Oh, I agree. Now, you mentioned the next adult project, The Vampires in Manhattan. And I know you've written several adult novels in the past with subjects that were in the fashion world. Is this also involved with the fashion world? And I'm assuming that your work in fashion influenced your writing in those.
Yes, a little bit. When I started out, I was a journalist and I covered the fashion beat, mostly because the paper that I started out at didn't have a fashion reporter. And, when you're young, you're just trying to kind of find a niche for your writing. And I said, oh, I'll do the fashion stuff because I was interested in it a little bit. It was more like a hobby. And then when I started writing books, because I'd been writing about fashion for a while, it just seemed very natural to write about that kind of glittery world. And a lot of Blue Bloods in the beginning was kind of inspired by my fashion days. I remember being at a party with a 15-year-old Paris Hilton, and just thinking, she is such an old teenager, and that's when I thought about these kind of adult-like kids running around New York who were 15, but really they were living the lives of 30-year-olds. She was so sophisticated and so jaded at such a young age. So definitely there's been part of that world that's come out in my books.
Most of your titles were released within short time frames. Do you write quickly, or do you write in advance, well in advance of a projected release date, or both? Or what's your writing style?
I think you have to do both because when the deadlines are that tight, you definitely have to do both far in advance and very quickly. It actually takes me a long time to write the books, or at least to gestate them. I like to think about the ideas, I think about the world, the characters for about a year. And then the actual writing doesn't take that long, probably about 3 months for a first draft. But you need that year to let the ideas kind of simmer and your characters kind of start taking on their characteristics and their story. So the answer is both.
I'm wondering, since you write several series at once, are your characters so well defined in your mind that you never confuse them? How do you keep the series separate?
I'm an outliner, so I'm a planner. I can outline the big picture, so I outline my books. I can outline many different books in a week. So I'll know where I am on Witches, where I am with Blue Bloods, where I am with my new project. And as long as I'm doing big picture work, I can work on many books. But once I start getting into the nitty gritty, I would say the last month of working on a book, that's when I kind of have to concentrate on one book and kind of leave the other things to themselves. But while I'm in kind of an early stage, I can work on a lot of different series.
When did you begin writing?
I was first published when I was 25, I think in 1996. And I wrote an article for a free newspaper called the New York Press. And I wrote for them for a couple of years, and I sold my first novel at 27.
That's great. And who or what has been your biggest influence?
I would say probably Stephen King, especially for the supernatural stories. He was my favorite author when I was a teenager, and all I did from the age of 14 to 18 was read Stephen King novels. I mean, I think I read every book of his until 1989 when I went to college. And when I went to college, I stuck with the Dark Tower series, but I haven't really read any of the new stuff. But for those 4 years intensely, I was just a Stephen King fan. And I think how he shapes a story, how he draws in an audience, how he writes about characters, I mean, that's been a huge influence. But another book that really influenced my writing was when I was 22, I read War and Peace in a 3-month period where I was very depressed. I just loved it. And I just kind of feel like I absorbed that book, and I just loved everything. I always tell people it's just a big soap opera. It's a really fun book with a lot of balls and about love and romance and family. I remember getting out of that and thinking, I want to do something like that, but not 2,000 pages.
Now, you were born in the Philippines, I believe, and moved with your family to San Francisco when you were 12. Do any of those or any of your personal experiences weave their way into your storylines?
Oh, yes, definitely. In a way, in Blue Bloods, Skylar's story is a little bit of my family story. My family kind of lost its fortune when we moved to America, and I really relate to the shabby new surroundings, with trappings of the former glory of the past. Even when we were in Manila, my mom's family, her grandfather was this very wealthy Chinese merchant, and his wife was Spanish. They were one of the first families with an automobile in the 1910s in Manila, and we had this compound with like 5 mansions on it. But when I was going there to visit my grandparents, it was all kind of in like a little bit of a Grey Gardens decay. There were these like kind of abandoned mansions that we owned that nobody fixed up, and there was just, you could go there and everything was draped over in covers, and you could kind of see like the old life and then the new old people, the old people kind of shuffling around. And I don't know, it really made a huge impression on me, kind of like that idea that there was this really wonderful wealthy past, but it's in the past and now we're just living with the dust and the diamonds are gone.
Quite a story. But in addition to your personal experiences, do you do research for your books? I mean, have you actually traveled to some of the various settings like Florence and Paris that you describe in the books?
Oh, yes, yes. We'd love to travel. My husband is a little bit more well traveled than I am, just because I couldn't leave the country for a while I was getting my green card. So, he had lived in Italy for a while. So we used a lot of his research and his experiences in some of those cities. And then what I do if I can't travel to the city that I'm writing about is I actually hire a local researcher who lives in the city and knows it really well, and they put together like a little document for me to use. And then if I can go, I definitely like to go. I would rather go, but I find that even if I go, I'm still a tourist. So I really like to rely on a local researcher to really tell me what the city is like and where to go and what people think about it. I don't want to write the tourist guide to Paris. I want to write Paris through the eyes of people who've lived there, who know it really well. I wrote about Cairo, and the woman who did the research for me had grown up in Jordan and and she actually lived in Cairo for many years, and it just makes a difference.
Now, you were, if I'm not mistaken, a computer programmer before you became a creative writer, or were you doing both at the same time? The kind of disparate venues, if you will.
Yes, it's so funny. I went to Columbia, and when I graduated, I needed a day job. I needed a job to stay in New York, to pay for New York. And I actually was recruited by a computer firm, that their policy was to hire English majors and train them to be computer programmers. So they actually looked for English majors that they could teach computer science to. And I thought that was really interesting. And the guy who owned the firm told me that he found that if he could train an English major to do computers, they were much better at communicating to the clients. They were much better at explaining the programs and dealing with people. And he found that a lot of computer engineers didn't have the people skills to deal with client work. So he thought it would be better to try to teach English majors computer skills. So that was really interesting. And I did it for a while. I really enjoyed the logical puzzles of programming, but I didn't really like learning the language, the technical skills much. I had a very, I was pretty good at programming in one language. And then when we switched to another language, I just had no interest in any of the technical, really boring parts. But I really liked the high up logic puzzles. And they told me I was really good at debugging really complicated programs and figuring out all the logic. But I was really lazy, and I couldn't be bothered to learn really simple commands. So I was in it for about 10 years, and I did all right. And I was writing on the side. I was a freelance writer and then also a fashion editor. And I kind of went back and forth for a while. I left computers, I worked for magazines, and then when the magazine world went through the recession, I went back to computers. And then I finally left computers once and for all, I think when my first novel was published. So
Wow, it sounds like you're a fabulous multitasker. Music also plays a large part in how you write. Can you explain that?
Oh, sure. I think it's just part of having kind of a teen outlook on life. I think when you're a teenager, you what do you have to do but get really into your books, your music, the movies? And for me, music really sets kind of a tone and really inspires emotion for the books. My books, what people really relate to is the emotion in them and, what the characters are feeling. So I really get really obsessed with one song, and that will really inspire one book, like the feeling for that book. And some of them are actually named after the songs, like Misguided Angel was very much inspired by the Cowboy Junkies Misguided Angel song. And we actually had to pay for the rights to use, I think, not the title, but we quoted a lot from the song. And so we asked permission, and it was really cool. The guys from the Cowboy Junkies, his daughter was a fan of Blue Bloods, so they were very happy to give permission.
Well, that's great. A great connection there. Speaking of audio, have you had a chance to hear Christina Moore's narration of the audiobook of Gates of Paradise?
Not Gates of Paradise yet. I don't think I've had a copy, but I've heard her narrate the other books, and I think she's fabulous. It's really, really wonderful to hear the story come to life and how careful they are. They asked me how to pronounce everything correctly, and it's just wonderful with the care that Christina takes and bring the story to the audio life.
In addition to the Vampire in Manhattan, are there any other projects on the drawing board that we should be looking for?
Oh, yes. We actually, my new fantasy series is called Heart of Dread, and the first book, Frozen, is out this September. And it's co-written with my husband, who's kind of a silent partner in the Blue Bloods and Witches of East End series, but he's fully credited now in our new series. And we like to think it's Lord of the Rings in reverse. Instead of the story of magic leaving the world, it's a story of how magic comes back to the world. So it's set in this post-apocalyptic frozen world of New Vegas, and our hero and heroine have to find a way out in search of the mythical, magical land.
It sounds fascinating. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited about Gates of Paradise in the audiobook version. And once again, I'd like to thank you for your comments today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this Downpour.com interview with Melissa de la Cruz. You can find Gates of Paradise at Downpour.com.